Joining us now, we have the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, Dr. Trita Parsi. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
So when last we spoke, the Iranian nuclear deal talks were on the ropes, partly over U.S. delays, frankly, and partly over new Russian demands that they be granted a kind of sanctions loophole through these negotiations. And this is when the talks were purportedly right on the verge of a real breakthrough and possible completion. So just bring us up to date with where we stand today.
So the Russian issue essentially has been resolved. The Iranian foreign minister was in Moscow a couple of days after the Russians first came out with that more outlandish demand. We don't know exactly what happened in Moscow, but the Russians backed off and are only then demanding that their specific activities in the JCPOA be protected against sanctions. And that's something that from the U.S. side was never a question mark. That was something we were willing to do. So that issue has now been put aside, at least for now. We don't know if something else would blow up from Moscow over for whatever reasons they may have. So now we're at a stage in which essentially there's only two issues remaining. And it's some of the most difficult issues. And the two sides are essentially staring each other down, seeing who is willing to cave in first on those two issues. And I'll be happy to tell you what those are.
Yeah, go ahead. What are the two issues that still remain?
So the Iranians have once again asked that the United States needs to provide assurances to give the Iranians confidence that the U.S. is not going to walk out of the deal again. This has been an issue that has been plaguing the talks from the very beginning. And it's been very difficult because it essentially means that without any of those assurances, most people expect this deal to only last for the duration of Biden's presidency himself. And that, for the Iranians, have very severe economic implications. It means that they're not going to get any major investments because the investors need to know that their money in Iran and their investment in Iran is going to be safe for at least 5, 6, 7 years. 2.5 years is not enough, particularly when it comes to some energy contracts, et cetera. So it's going to deprive the Iranian from investments if that is not done. But I think the Iranians are quite clear that it's very unlikely that the U.S. will cave on that issue. I think the U.S. side essentially believes that the political costs will be too high to provide anything that gives the impression that Biden is tying the hand of the next president. The other issue is a very sensitive one for both sides. That is that the Iranian IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is on one of the U.S.'s terrorist lists. It's actually on several of them. But one in specific, the Iranians are asking that they be taken off of, which for the Iranians have some symbolic value. And from the U.S. side has a huge symbolic cost, the political cost. And what they're doing right now is trying to see that if the U.S. were to take this step, what would the Iranians be willing to give in terms of regional activities? And it would be quite, it would be quite shameful, frankly, if the talks collapsed on this issue, because the actual value of that IRGC listing is not particularly significant. Essentially, it's a big sign saying, we think you suck. That's it. And we have plenty of more signs of that kind. But it will be a political cost for the Biden administration if they agree to it. The question is, can they get something in return that alleviates some of that cost? And the bigger picture, of course, is, are we willing to, risk the entire JCPOA over this issue? I hope neither side is willing to do that.
On the issue of the U.S. providing some sort of assurance that this deal is going to extend beyond the years of Biden's presidency, which might be over in just a couple years, given the fact that his approval ratings are relatively low, and I'm sure that factors into the analysis here. What kind of assurances could the U.S. even really provide if they wanted to?
Well, there's several things that could be done. None of them, in and of themselves, is a sufficient assurance. And the U.S. is right in saying that there's no ironclad guarantee that can be provided. I think there are mechanisms, however, that could be provided. And just to go over what was done back in 2015, when the U.S. side had these concerns about the Iranians, fearing that the Iranians would only be committed to the JCPOA under Rouhani, and it could change once there was a change in power in Iran. Well, the U.S. cleverly invented a concept called snapback sanctions at the UN Security Council, which meant that instead of having to go through a 6 to 9 month period of trying to convince the other countries to snap back sanction on Iran if the Iranians violated the agreement, it would only take 30 days, and the Russians and the Chinese essentially gave up their veto. They cannot veto any move by the US or the Europeans to snap back sanctions. The signal was that if the Iranians cheat, rest assured, you're going to be heavily sanctioned. There is no doubt about that. That was a mechanism put in place to deter the Iranians from doing what the US ended up doing itself, which is to just walk away from the deal. Something similar can be done on the other side then, whether that is to tie the UN Security Council resolution that embodies the JCPOA closer to the JCPOA. So any violation of the JCPOA or walkout of the JCPOA that is without cause would also be a violation of a Chapter 7 UN Security Council resolution. In and of itself, it's not sufficient. But then you combine it perhaps with having European central banks handle the transactions of Iranian trade, mindful of the fact that the US is not going to be sanctioning any European central banks anytime soon. That would give that trade a degree of protection, that would give the companies a degree of comfort, knowing that even if the US reimposes sanctions that the Europeans say are illegal and illegitimate, the European banks will have enough political cover to be able to continue to handle those transactions and that trade, and the companies will be protected. So there's different ways this could have been done, but it required a tremendous amount of political will. It would be attacked by the other side, there's no doubt about it. But I think ultimately it was an issue of, is the political will there, and is the political cost sufficiently low that this would be doable. And both sides have essentially come to the conclusion it's simply not going to happen. And they've resigned themselves to believing that they have to just depart from the assumption that this deal is going to last about 3 years. And if we're lucky, it will last longer.
And so let's say that those lingering issues are resolved in a mutually satisfactory way. What are the domestic politics here of the deal? What are we hearing from Republicans, and what are we hearing from some skeptical Democrats?
So you have a situation in which I think the noise leaves the impression that the political cost of agreeing to a deal that prevents Iran from having a nuclear weapon is much higher than it actually is. There is a huge amount of support in the country for the deal. In fact, support for the deal has risen since Trump left the deal because it became very clear to everyone how valuable the deal was. Moreover, proponents of the proposal have not been able to rally around anything because there has not been a finished deal. So they've been a little bit more passive, whereas opponents of the deal don't care about the details. They don't care. They don't need to know what the deal is. They oppose it in principle. And as a result, they've been attacking the deal, as have some Democrats, a handful of them. And it's left the impression that the political cost of doing this is higher than I think it actually is. Once there is a deal, I think we're going to see that there is significant support for that, certainly enough to be able to withstand any effort to vote this down in the Senate. And I do wonder if at times the administration has overestimated the political opposition.
Well, and, if we're just going to talk about pure horse race politics, you also have to factor in what the political cost would be of Iran actually acquiring a nuclear weapon, which I would have to think would be quite a bad look for that to happen under this administration. Finally, how do you handicap the odds at this point? Do you think that we are likely to see a deal that's struck here?
I think we're still at 70-30. I think there's still a decent chance that this will be done. I'm getting worried because I was hoping that it would be done by now, but I would still say that it's at 70-30. And I think, Krystal, the point you raised there is an excellent one. The cost of not getting a deal, which then would lead the Iranians to further expand their program towards the capacity of building a bomb, as well as an escalation in the region, potentially military confrontation. You have to juxtapose that to the political cost of some people being really upset that we took down a sign that said, "You suck." I mean, it really is a no-brainer at the end of the day. And let me throw out a scenario that I'm worried about. The United States right now is in a dire need of making sure that oil prices go down. There is about 50 million plus barrels of Iranian oil floating around on the seas in tankers. The Iranians have pumped out that oil, but they can't sell it, so they just put it on these tankers. As soon as the deal is struck, that oil can be sold, and it can have an impact on the price of oil. If there is no deal, however, there is a scenario in which the United States would actually start confiscating that oil. It's already happened in the past on one or two occasions. Confiscate that oil, sell it, and keep the money. If that happens, 50 million barrels of oil at current oil prices is about $6 billion. If the United States takes $6 billion from the Iranians in that oil, I suspect that the Iranians will retaliate in the region. And then you do have some form of a war scenario staring at us in the face. And the political cost of that is far, far greater than just signing a deal that everyone knew actually protected U.S. national interests.
Yeah, that is a devastating worst case scenario and something that should be avoided at all costs. Dr. Parsi, it's always great to see you. Thank you for making these things so clear.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. And thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for having our backs, even in this incredibly censorious climate. As you all know, premium subscribers, you guys make all of this happen, and we could not possibly be more grateful to you. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back here next week.
Hey guys, we're gonna be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're gonna help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys and we appreciate you so much.